is a just 200 pixel. I reduce the content box size, remember that. Okay, now the content box, now I am going to define the border of the div. Okay, border is 1 pixel solid, and I can show as a red color of the border. Okay, now if I go and talk with the border, now this is the border of that, right? Let me increase a little bit so you can see the overfloating and other stuff. Okay, so 3 pixels was increased. Right, this is the border. Now at this moment, so now it was showing as a overflow. Now I want, what I can do is I want to define the overflow height. So I want to define the height also, because height is the most important thing here. Height is, I can define the 100 pixel. Right, now look at that. So let me give some breaks on this point so you will get a clear understand what's coming out. Okay, I'm just giving some break elements over here to get some space, right? So look at that, the content, my actual div size is that not 300 pixel, like 200 into 100 is a 300, means the size which I'm talking about. Height is the 100 pixel with the 100 pixel, but the size was defined as a box. Now my content was exceeding the box size. Now what happening, it was coming out of the box. It means it is by default, it is in the visual show, the overflow in the visual mode, right? So let me show you what are the options that we have on the overflow on the div. Okay, so this is the overflow which you need to select. Now we are showing as the visual mode. Okay, now if I go to the hidden mode, then what about the information, okay, which is coming outside of my border, which is the coming the text which is coming outside of my box, now those will no longer show up, right? Earlier it was in the visual mode, and which actually the show of the content even though it's in an overflow, right? Now the content was exceeded, then the component size. Now if you want to hide the information, then you need to choose the overflow. It's not about only the content, even though when you're talking about any of the element which is exceeded the size of its parent, now it's going to be controlled whether you want to show up the information, whether you want to hide the information. When you want to hide the information, then automatically the parent component will come on top of the child component, right? So that's where your overflow of the information will be controlled by your CSS objects, right? Now the second part, if you want to show up that information, now if you show the visible, now it will become outside of your content, right? Visible and hide. Its only thing is whether you overflow content want to show or whether overflow content want to hide. These are the two options that you have, right? So if you want to show up, you can define as visible. It means you need not to define the overflow, because overflow default property is visible even though it's not overflowing the data outside of your parent component. Okay, now other part is that now there is a two section. Now other section is the auto is a, if it is the content was exceeded, it will overflow. Okay, if the content was exceeded, then automatically your scroller will be appear to show up the information. If the content was not exceeded, right, if your content was too little low, or it was limited, so it won't show up any scrollers, right? There is no scrollers is appearing over here because the space was sufficient. It means once it hit the border, your inside content will hit the border, then automatically the scroller will be appear in the auto mode, right? When the overflow is in auto mode, then automatically once it hit the border, it will appear the scroller. You can scroll down your component, and you can see the remaining text which is in the overflowing, right? Now other important thing, okay, in the CSS, if you don't want to the auto, okay, let me what I can do is, if you want to keep the scroller always, so you have an option of the scroller, right? So you can define the scroller, and then automatically your both the side, your horizontal scroller, vertical scroller will be appear. It will be there when the content was exceed, the scroller will be appear. If the content was not exceeded, okay, your scroller won't be appear, but yeah, scroll bar will be there, right? Your scroll bar will be there, right? So your bars, this is a scroller and this is a scroll bar. The scroll bar will be there if you define the scroll for the overflow, but the scroller won't be appear until unless it hit the border. border, right? So this is the various kind of overflows will actually you have on the CSS when you have some overlapping on the content and the component. So where you can choose the overflow to content and represent of the information according to your requirement, whether you want to hidden the information, you want to show the information, you want to auto defining of the overflow, or you want to show up the scrollers by default, and when your data was overflowing, then you can bring up the scrollers, right? So this kind of an information that can be controlled by the overflow. Remember, this is a very important declaration on the CSS when you're defining your child component, because when you go to the real-time scenarios, you are not going to work with the simple div or simple table. So it will having a very n number of child definitions, like nth child of the and depth of the child you need to navigate. So when you're navigating that, you might see some kind of overflow overlapping. So that's where you need to define the all this kind of your definitions, right? Now, this other important point that I'm going to mention over here is the floating. Okay, the floating, you have the left and right. So these are the inherited components. So actually, it is coming from your prototype. When I'm coming to the JavaScript, I will tell you what is the prototype. But these are basically for the prototype inheritancy. When you have a parent component, you need to choose the inheritancy. For most of the floating, will go to the right to the left, left to the right. Okay. So if I define over here, now your component was moved to the left to the right. It means when you want to move your components on the other direction, like floating, by default floating is the left to the right, but you want to change to the right, you can change to the right also. If you have two divs, you can define specifically to the floating on the which side you want to place that component. There is no top and bottom. You will have the floating on the left and right. If you have a two component or three component